And now for more, we welcome to studio Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, the former IDF international spokesperson and a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and our correspondent, Balich Sladin. Gentlemen, thank you both so much. So Emily, Romy and Doron have been in Israeli territory, Jonathan, for 4 nights now, sleeping in beds in the comfort, maybe a hospital, but still knowing their family and loved ones are nearby. So much hope and anticipation and dread and anxiety about this weekend. Your sense?
So a few important things are about to happen. One, the most important is hopefully the return of 4 Israeli hostages. 2 is the provision of a list of who is alive and who is dead. And that's an important list, very important list for both for Israel and for Hamas. It will influence how Israel will calculate the next weeks coming ahead. But I think it will also give an indication to Israel and to all of the negotiators how serious Hamas is and what really are the options to go beyond the first deal and go to a second deal, which will facilitate the return of a maximum amount of 65 Israeli men that are still held in the Gaza Strip. So it's an important test to kind of test the waters and see where we're going. Also important happening as we speak is an Israeli decision, or rather the policy towards the ceasefire in Lebanon.
Right.
Maybe we will be discussing it, but crucial moments. The time is almost up, and now is decision time. Is Israel going to withdraw from southern Lebanon, knowing that the Lebanese armed forces have not been deployed, and knowing that Hezbollah is still present in some parts of the southern parts of Lebanon, mostly the eastern part? So there are 3 very important things happening.
Is that 2,400 aid trucks have entered Gaza since the ceasefire. Some of the aid has been, quote unquote, diverted by Hamas. Others might describe it as stealing, hijacking. Your sense of what it means if there is a violation around the deal, how does that impact this aid that is now flowing into the Palestinian enclave?
So I think that the aid, many times misnamed humanitarian aid, but the goods coming into the Gaza Strip, they really are the center of gravity and the source of force for Hamas to remain in power. In lieu of anything else, this is what Hamas uses in order to recruit, maintain control, and in order to have leverage on the civilian population. Many discussions have been made inside Israel before the hostage deal was implemented, the ceasefire was implemented, about actually taking control over this process and denying Hamas the ability to do exactly what we're seeing, to take control of the goods coming in and selling it or using it for political purposes. So I think this is really what it's about. This is the future. When Israel will decide, I think it's a when and not an if, when Israel will decide that Israel is going to take control over the distribution of food, that will be the time when Hamas will be in real trouble. That is, of course, not something that's going to happen now while we are under a ceasefire and while there's a deal going on and while there's the option of getting hostages back. But as mentioned here before, each side will be looking for quote-unquote excuses. One issue that I think is really important going forward is the mechanism by which food is distributed in Gaza. As long as it stays in the hands of Hamas, Hamas remains in power. The moment it is taken from Hamas, then that will be the beginning of the end of their rule over Gaza.
Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, and correspondent Balich Sladin are still in studio. Hezbollah saying just a short while ago it would not accept any extension to the deal and that Israeli troops need to withdraw from southern Lebanon. This happening just a short while ago. Jonathan, your take on what this means?
Well, it's to be expected that Hezbollah would, of course, oppose it, but what we need to be listening to is the volume or the intensity of their opposition to it. Hezbollah really isn't in any position to be dictating terms. They were beaten severely during the war. They've lost domestic clout and they have lost international clout. And most importantly, they do not currently have a way of resupplying themselves because Syria because of what happened in Syria and because of the fact that the Iranian regime can no longer use Syria as a way to supply Hezbollah. So they're not really in a position to be dictating terms, and as such, I think that they will calibrate their response accordingly. My assessment is that that Israel made sure to have a tacit approval of the US before making the request, and a backdoor understanding, indirect understanding with the Lebanese that yes, they really haven't deployed, which is correct on the ground. The Lebanese armed forces have not deployed and they have not implemented the agreement. And as such, it is still tactically impossible for Israel to withdraw, and it would expose Israeli civilians to virtually having Hezbollah on the border again. So I think what we're going to see, my careful assessment is that this will be allowed by the powers that govern this agreement, by the Americans and with tacit approval of the French, and we will see an extension and not a return to fighting. I don't think that anybody, world, local, Lebanese, Israeli, wants focus to be diverted to igniting that front again. And I think 30 more days of stability. Hopefully the Lebanese armed forces will deploy, and hopefully at the end of that time, Israel will be able to withdraw and focus on Gaza, Judea and Samaria, and many other things that Israel has to do.
Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus. So President Donald Trump is back in the Oval Office. He chooses his first phone call to a world leader to be to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. We've discussed relations between Riyadh and Washington and Jerusalem. What do you make of this call? What do you make of the strategy and what it means for relations down the line between Israel and Saudi Arabia?
Well, you remember we had a conversation a few days ago, last week, about the deal, about the terms of the deal between Israel and Hamas, where I said that I hope that there are additional understandings between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu that will be beneficial for Israel. Because if there aren't, it is a very bad deal vis-a-vis Hamas. This might be just that. This might be just the future and what really could be, I think, very beneficial for the US, for Saudi, and for Israel. And in the long run, it'll probably be good for Palestinians as well, but that still remains to be seen. And bottom line, this may be what where the region is going, an American-led prosperity-focused initiative that will bring American protection and assurances to the Saudis, which is the most important thing that they're looking for. Some kind of, as they say, pathway assurances for Palestinian statehood, which I think is flexible enough and allows Israel enough wiggle room to live with, and to end the conflict in Gaza after Hamas is taken out of the picture. That, I think, is what that call is about and what the future holds. There are still many moving parts. The Islamic Republic of Iran has a lot to say about that, and they will oppose and fight against it. There are the nuclear ambitions of the Iranians. The Houthis, which it really is quite, it defies logic that just now the US president redefined them as a terrorist organization. They are, I think, the embodiment of a terrorist organization, and the fact that they weren't defined as one really begs disbelief. But bottom line, we're, I think, looking ahead at the possible positive outcomes of the ceasefire in Israel, and hopefully that will lead to good things.
Still in studio, Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, and our correspondent, Balir Sladin. A volatile situation, many developments, Palestinian security forces, Israeli forces. Is there coordination? Jonathan, what do we know about what is happening there?
Well, this reminds me of the operation that Israel conducted in Tulkarem about half a year ago. Similar scope, similar size, I think similar objectives. I would call it mowing the lawn plus, not necessarily, really breaking the back of Palestinian terrorist organizations in Jenin, but really doing a more concentrated effort in Jenin. Important to note that Israel isn't deploying really heavy armor or heavier equipment. It is relatively light. It is not the type of equipment that we have in Gaza. So I think that the scope and the severity of the operation is different. The Palestinian Authority probably wouldn't want us to say, but it is at least coordinated, and there's basic deconfliction on the ground so that Israeli troops don't find themselves facing Palestinian security forces. And it, of course, comes after the PA started an operation, which they then ended with an agreement with the local gangs and organizations in Jenin and stop that operation. And Israel still needs to go in and attack the battalion, so-called Jenin battalion. It's about 150, 200 operatives. I think this can go on and it can spread to other cities. There's strong infrastructure in Tulkarem, in, of course, Nablus, in Jericho. There's massive Hamas infrastructure in Hebron. I don't think that is really on the line yet, because that would mean a big operation for Israel to deal with Hamas in Hebron. But this is local, responding to pressing needs. I suspect there's also a bit of politics involved, Israeli coalition politics as part of the considerations. But nevertheless, there's imminent threats coming out of Jenin, which Israeli security forces are now dealing with.